I've discovered a new image, an image for our time. It may not be so unique. We have seen, all of us have seen, the symbol of Jesus knocking at the door of your heart. A door that has no knob on the outside so that we have to open it from the inside and let God in, let Christ in. It's our responsibility. We've all heard of the symbol of the still, small voice in the quiet, calling to us. In the gospel story today, we see Jesus himself turning around as Andrew and the other disciple of John the Baptist began to follow him, and Jesus met them halfway. Jesus took the first step. So what's a symbol for our time for a call like the one that Samuel received in the Old Testament story? The new symbol, I'm sure many of you will recognize. A call from God is like a message on your voicemail. God has called you, and the question becomes then how and when or whether you will return God's call. God's call is always personal, person to person, direct to you. As with cell phones, some of us respond to a call from God by looking at the caller ID and letting it go to voicemail. Some of us will click on message like, sorry, I can't talk right now, or please leave a message. Some of us are busy on another call, and we make the choice to ignore God's call when it comes so that we can continue the other conversation. But God is patient, and God is willing to wait until we are ready to call back. Why is it that we so often put off returning God's call? Maybe it's because we sense that God calls us to do the very thing we have said we would never be caught doing, whatever that might be. Maybe it's because God calls us to do the very thing that we know other people are much better at doing than we are, whatever that may be. Or maybe it's because God's call so often comes to us when we least expect it and do not feel ready for it. Something like that call of God to Samuel. A call that Samuel had a hard time hearing for what it was. Samuel's situation should give us all encouragement. Because he was such a novice, God's vision to Samuel came with simple directions and easy to assemble pieces from his great mentor, Eli. Eli gave Samuel 3 definite things to do to be ready for God's vision. Go lie down. If he calls you, you should say, speak, Lord, because your servant is listening. Lie down, listen up, talk back. Let's start with lie down. Samuel is very much like the rest of us. He is so busy running around that he hardly knows where he's going. Your life feel like that? Up and down, Samuel pops, racing to Eli's side every time he thinks he hears the old man calling him. If you are walking in the woods and you get separated from your group, the very best way to get permanently lost is to go running around looking for your members of your group. If you remain calm and stay put and keep cool, chances are you will be found in no time. Eli's advice to lie down is a way of saying, let go. Let go of control. Let go of power. Lying down made Samuel surrender his being to a force that was bigger than he is. All of his previous jumping up and down was Samuel's attempt to remain in control of what was a strange, somewhat unnerving encounter that he was experiencing. What Eli really was advocating was for Samuel to trust the Spirit in the moment, in the situation. Find ways then to lie down in your day-to-day encounter with God. Be still, slow down, lie down. And second, listen up. The second part of Eli's advice to Samuel is implied when he begins to describe what Samuel should do if God calls you. Listen. In order for any of us to hear God, we must use our ears. Like a one-liner I saw on Facebook a while back, and you may have heard of this, that the word listen contains the same letters as the word silent. It's hard to listen when we're not being silent. Unfortunately, we all think that what gives us our identity is words. We are who we say we are. We are what we talk about. Before Samuel could become God's mouthpiece, he had to become an ear. He had to carefully cock his ear toward the divine, to be sensitive to the faintest rustle in the night. There are times in our lives when all that we hear is the static, when there is too much interference from our lives to catch the transmission clearly. But like with the radio, we need to stay tuned. We need to learn how to be capable of reception at any moment. We need to learn to listen for God with our whole being, even in the midst of all that. Lie down, listen up, and talk back. I believe that if all God was interested in was companionship, then God would have stopped creation at the creation of the dog. Yep. Dogs come when you call them, mostly. They lie down at your feet or in your lap. They go on long walks with you. And they show you unconditional, unmerited devotion. But God was not satisfied with mere companionship. God wanted relationship. And so God created human beings. Relationships require an intentional exchange of ideas and emotions between two parties. God waits for us to respond. God waits for us to question and even challenge the divine word that comes to us, because God wants relationship. In order to be in relationship, we must talk back to God. Sometimes this dialogue is nothing more than simply consenting, as Eli told Samuel to say, "Your servant is listening." Sometimes it's far more interactive. Sometimes it's a problematic conversation, and again, if we look to the Bible with the conversations with Job, or with Jonah, or with Jeremiah, were challenging. God has never been afraid of a little discussion or a little debate. We should not either. You know, I remember very clearly the first sermon that I heard preached when I was a student back in my seminary training 35 years ago. The student began by breaking all the rules. He knew that he was doing it, and in fact, the first rule that he broke was to begin the sermon with an apology, apologizing because, in spite of the fact that his homiletics professor, his preaching teacher, was in the chapel that morning, he was going to break the cardinal rule of that particular professor. He was going to talk about himself. He was going to talk about his own personal experience. And the title of his sermon was, "Who am I to be doing this?" Now, as a first-year seminary student, that was a question I'd been asking myself for a long time. Who am I to be doing this? As I walked forward and made the decision to go into ministry, who am I to be doing this? That question went far beyond the fact that I had just graduated the year before, with my master's degree in speech pathology, and that I had a really good job, the very job that I had coveted throughout my training at the University of Maine at Orono. It was much more than that. Who am I to be doing this? The question went way beyond the fact that I am a woman. God and I had debated about that one since I was 12 years old. And I had finally accepted the fact that God calls women as well as men to do the work of ministry, and that in fact God had not zapped the wrong person, but it was me and my femaleness that God wanted. So, who am I to be standing up here today, now, in this place of authority? Who am I to be speaking to you about how we should respond, or how we should behave, or how we should treat one another on this big blue marble of a world that we live on? What do I have to give to you, or to anyone, that will make any difference at all? That's a question that so many people have been struggling with once again, as the situation in our country continues to escalate and to confound, as our government officials make choices, or fail to make choices, that result in incredible harm to the very people that Jesus told us to care for, the last, the least, and the lost. Who am I to be doing this? What do I have to say to a world in turmoil? to children who have a limited understanding of what it really is to be homeless, or to live in the midst of a nation in constant war, or to be vilified simply because of the country that they come from, or the color of their skin, or the gender of the person that they love. Who am I to be doing this? What do any of us have to say to young people for whom life is a video game? And when you play in a video game, you get lots of lives, not just one. And if you do well, you're given even more lives. Not so in our life, in this earth. We are beginning to realize that all sides of any issue are multifaceted. Perhaps some of the recent events in the world have helped us to see that issues are never black or white. They are complex. We can cry over the losses. We can scream in anger at God, that God who is not afraid of debate. We can pray for our world's leaders. We can care for the young men and women who have been sent out to serve and have come back broken and wounded. We can pray for those who serve on all sides. Pray for them all at the same time. I grew up in this country, the United States of America, and I'm proud to be an American. A person who has the freedoms and the liberty that we so value, that we treasure. I grew up in the church, and I am proud to be a Christian, to follow the one who really is our only ultimate hope. My friends, we are so powerless. We cannot take Jesus to Haiti, to El Salvador, to Africa. We cannot take Jesus to Israel, or to Afghanistan, or to Palestine. We cannot even take Jesus to Russia. The idea of us taking Jesus to the heathen is ridiculous. We cannot take Jesus anywhere. That's because Jesus is already there. Jesus is already there, loving and healing and ministering. Before we were born, Jesus was there. Before we could think of going, Jesus was already there. We go on mission trips to join Jesus in the work that Jesus is doing already. To believe in Jesus is not just agreeing to a list of creeds and affirmations. It's entering into relationship with him. And relationships are not made by what somebody tells us, but by firsthand encounters. I could tell you that my husband Bob is a wonderful person. I could tell you that he's compassionate, winsome, fun to be around, someone you really should get to know. I could tell you enough so that you would want to come and meet him, but I cannot create relationship between you and him. I can't do that just by telling you about him. Until you actually meet him and get acquainted with him and spend some time with him, you won't really know him. The best I can do is to point you in his direction back there in the corner. I could even introduce him to you, but it's still up to the two of you. But that's what Philip did for his friend Nathanael. Philip told Nathanael what a wonderful person that Jesus was. He shared the excitement of his new relationship. We have found him about whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth. But Nathanael, like so many skeptical people in our world today, was not convinced. All he had to say was, can anything good come out of Nazareth? I hear echoes of that in today's world. Can anything good come out of? Nazareth was a provincial town, and it was far removed from the center of worship in Jerusalem, and it was a common place. It was filled with peace-loving people, but it could never be the kind of town that could produce the Messiah. For Nathanael, who was so sophisticated, Jesus' hometown was enough reason all by itself not to believe in him. Philip could have gotten into a long discussion with Nathanael. He could have told him all the reasons that Jesus is who he said he is. He could have even come to the defense of the town of Nazareth if he wanted to, but he didn't do that. What he said to Nathanael was, come and see. Come and see. He invited him to meet the man himself. Philip had the good sense to know he could not convince Nathanael to believe. Only Jesus himself could do that. Do you ever wish for direct spiritual encounter with the divine? Do you ever secretly wish that God would beckon you out from the ordinariness of life with as unambiguous of a touch as that of Jesus summoning Nathanael to follow me? Or the call to Samuel in the night? Do you secretly wish that you could simply and immediately respond with complete certainty when that call comes? Here I am, Lord, as Eli told Samuel to do. Or to say, as Nathanael said, you are indeed the Son of God. My friends, the call is waiting. It's waiting on your voicemail for you to respond in the way that God calls you to respond. God is offering each one of us a new way of seeing the world. See, Jesus sees us not as we are, but as we can be. And Jesus says to us, give your life to me, and I will make you what you have it in you to be. So, who am I to be doing this? Who are we to be doing anything in our world run amok? We are followers of Jesus Christ, children of God, empowered by the Spirit, gifted and called. How long will you wait to return that call?